Awesome.
My name is Nate. I'm going to Pepsi.
Okay.
My name is Yi Young. I'm going to LinkedIn for full-time.
Awesome.
Christian going to Dell for some.
Andrew going to Colombo.
Okay, cool. So pretty, broad group, different places that you guys are going. I want this to be a discussion, so I don't feel like you have to save questions for the end. We can dive into certain things. We can go different places. What I thought was kind of three things that I'd talk about today. A little bit about my career, some of the things that I've kind of learned in terms of where I want to, about careers in general, and when I coach people, it's one of the things that I do is coach people on their career goals and objectives and how to get there. And then I thought at the end, there's some things that we're kind of working on as a team at Vivid that I would like to get your guys' perspective on. So, but totally open to taking it any which way you guys want to go, and if there's things you want to spend more time on, we can absolutely do that. So, I graduated from the program in 2004. Before I came into the program, I graduated from the University of Idaho, up in Moscow, Idaho, and worked for a couple of years for an environmental engineering consulting firm called AMEC, and that was my first HR role. Went in there, actually, for 1 month, I worked as a recruiter, and I hated it. And this is literally the days, and this is gonna sound really funny, but the night before I'd go to work, I'd have to spend time going through the phone book or searching online to find companies to call into to try to recruit either into or out of. And after a month of doing this, I was like, this is stupid. I hate this job. And my professor actually called me and said, hey, there's this company that's looking for an HR person, and I recommended you should go interview. And I was like, score, that's awesome. So I lived in Seattle. My husband and I lived in Seattle, and we did that for a couple of years. Absolutely loved Seattle. And then he decided to take a job here, and so then I said, oh, I think I'll go get my MBA. So I did that, and then I interned at GE for the summer at their equipment management division. Loved it, but GE, they, at the end of their internship, they get all their interns together and they say, so, well, this is how it's going to work. You're either going to get an offer or you're not, and I did get an offer. And it may be different now, but this was how it was back then. And by the way, if you have a dual career situation, you might want to think about if GE is really going to work for you. And that was the situation that I was in. Both my husband and I were very career focused. And actually during that summer, I lived in Connecticut and he was here. And once a month, one of us would get on a plane, but usually him, would fly out and spend some time, and then he'd fly back. And I thought to myself, I'm not really sure how this is going to work for me, because most of the GE sites are very remote locations, and you're going to spend 8 months there, and then you're going to be on to the next site. So came back for my second year, interviewed with several companies, and got an offer from Honeywell, which was awesome because Honeywell's a lot like GE, but you can do multiple rotations in the same location, and they offered me a position in Phoenix, and so it was really easy for me to get on a plane Friday night, or for my husband to get on a plane Friday night and fly down to Phoenix or fly back to Salt Lake and then do it all over again Monday morning. So we did that for 2 years. And it worked great. You might be thinking, holy cow, how do you do it? But it was awesome because it was like a vacation every weekend. So when in the wintertime, he came down to Phoenix and we went golfing and swimming and found my goal is to find a new restaurant every Friday night so that when I picked him up from the airport, we would go eat someplace new. And then in the summertime, I would fly here, and it was awesome. And then I got pregnant, and I was like, this is going to be really hard to do with a kid. So we decided we had to pick a place to live, and decided that it would be Salt Lake. So I left Honeywell, had a baby, and then decided I was ready to go back to work after about 4 months. And started interviewing. And got an offer with this company called Fort Longyear. And really at the time I didn't know a ton about them. They were this really obscure company in West Valley that was in a manufacturing plant, and it was really dirty. And I was like, oh, this is this mining thing. But I took the job anyway, and it was amazing. And that is actually the first thing from a career standpoint that has sort of stuck with me is there is, you need to have a plan, but luck plays a really big part in your career. And for me, the luck part of it was that I landed at Fort Lanier at the time that I did. So what I didn't really totally understand when I took the job was that Fort Lanier was this 120-year-old company that had been part of a mining company called Anglo American. And then Advent and Bain had just purchased them out of this mining company and said, hey, we think there's a lot of opportunity for you if you stand alone. And so they spun them out, and it was about $600 million business when I joined, and grew to about $2.2 billion when I left there. And they had just hired in all of these executives. Many of them were from GE, so I was like, sweet, I feel right at home, I kind of know the culture. And was able to bring a lot of the skill sets that I had learned at Honeywell. And it was really sort of natural to implement those things at Fort because the leadership mentality was very similar. So it was a really great time for me to come in. I came in a junior role that the first project that they asked me to do was to stand up a applicant tracking system, and globally. And I was like, okay, I'm sure I can do that. Like, I've never done that before, but I know a little bit about applicant tracking. And so I launched that globally, and kind of caught the attention of the CHRO of the company. So I actually reported into a manager in the US, and caught the attention of the CHRO and started, like, even though I worked for this manager, I started, most of my project report outs were for the CHRO. Developed a really strong relationship with him, and then he started just giving me more projects. And eventually the reporting relationship, after a few months, kind of just switched over to him. So that's where the luck kind of comes in. The skill part of it comes in was I had to deliver. I had to demonstrate that I could deliver on launching an applicant tracking system. The next project that he put me on was figuring out how we were going to do performance management across the company, because we never really did that. And by the way, this is a mining company, so what is it like to work at a mining company? It's like a lot of blue-collar workers and a lot of rough, tough guys, and so, you know, the models may not that you might be used to may not necessarily work in that environment, so we had to kind of figure that out. Probably the thing that I enjoyed the most, at least early career, was we were doing a lot of acquisitions at the time. So in the first couple of years, Advent and Bain actually sold to another private equity company called Macquarie. And Macquarie was very focused on trying to get us to acquire other companies to grow their investment. And so they had us on an acquisition order. So my job for about a year was to just like get on a plane every week, fly to this next company that we were looking at, due diligence, come back with recommendations on whether we should buy this company, how would we integrate them if we bought them. It was a ton of fun. Yeah.
So was that an HR role?
It was an HR role, yeah.
Oh, really?
Yeah, so we had a diligence team that had representation from different functions,
Sure.
you know, from finance,
Oh,
from
so you
marketing.
went with other people?
Yeah, so went with other people, and my job was the HR diligence, and in particular assessing the leadership team. And trying to figure out, like, do we need the leadership team to stick around in order for it to be successful, and then how would we position the deal to ensure that the leadership team stuck around. So that was an awesome experience. And that actually leads me to kind of the next thing that I learned in my career, was that one size doesn't fit all. I started out as a really large company at Honeywell, and I was a small fish in a really big pond, and that was actually really good for me when I started out because I learned a lot of basic fundamentals around what good looks like. But ultimately, like, my fit is a much bigger fish in a much smaller pond. Not a tiny pond. Like, I don't want to be at a startup company, at least not at this point in my career. But I have really enjoyed being with businesses that range from about 500 million to about 5 billion. That is kind of my sweet spot because I get to, the company has enough money to do some really cool things, and I get to go and build. And that is what I found that I enjoy the most, at least at this point in my career. And I found that at Board by doing things like standing up systems and doing big deals and things that I probably wouldn't have got to do at a Honeywell. Or maybe I would have gotten to do one or two of those things in my career at Honeywell, but not to the extent that I did at Borlanger. So kind of fast forward, had several jobs within Bort, and incidentally, almost, every job except for one that I took was actually a new role that sort of was created. I created that role. So when I first came in, the role that I had taken didn't exist. We had restructured the company into these two different business units, and I moved into the head of HR role over one of the business units. It was the products division, and that role hadn't existed before. So that was kind of something that I also learned about myself, was I'm comfortable with like figuring it out. When it's not all mapped out, like come in, figure out what you're supposed to do, how do you add value. And then eventually, so I think this would have been 2010, the CHRO, who I reported into, different CHRO at this point in time, but said, hey, we would like to send you to Australia. And I was like, yeah, that's just gonna be so awesome. Like, for an expat assignment, going to Australia, like, that is very cool. So I'd always wanted to do an expat assignment. I was totally prepared to go to some obscure country where it was gonna be really difficult, but then, you know, when they said Australia, I was like, that is awesome, because hopefully culture-wise, it's not gonna be that big of a difference. My family was 100% behind me, so, you know, came home. Actually, I took a trip out there, and it was, I didn't realize it at the time, but it was sort of like a setup of, here, we're gonna get you out here, and then we're gonna see, like, what do you think, and then we're kind of gonna pitch to you, do you wanna come out here for a while? And so I was out, you know, in Australia for some meetings, and I remember calling my husband saying, I'm pretty sure that they're thinking to send us here. Like, this is kind of what it's shaping up to be, and how do you feel about that? And so then, you know, a couple of weeks later, they said, hey, you know, we're really serious about this. Would you want to come out? And my husband was like, absolutely, I will. If this is what you want to do, I'll support you. So he actually quit his job, and we packed up our two kids. We had two kids by then. And off to Australia we went, and it actually was a lot bigger of a culture shock than you might think. For a couple of reasons. One, so that my first trip out to Australia, this was actually before we moved, but I was the head of HR for APAC, and they sent me out there for a couple of weeks to do some work. So I went to Asia, and in my first trip, I went to Thailand for some meetings, and then we had a driller who died. And so the VP of the region and I had to go to this funeral. And this funeral was a Buddhist funeral. And so we go, and it's pouring rain, and everybody's there in like flip-flops, and they hand this lighter to us, and we're supposed to actually, as the representatives of the company, he's being cremated, and we're supposed to light the crematorium, however you do it, this crematorium in this Buddhist temple. So that was kind of like culture shock number one. I'm like, what am I doing here? This is part of the job? Like, this is kind of crazy. And then, you know, I had some meetings with a bunch of drillers, and a lot of our drillers were actually Australian drillers. And I don't know, has anybody been to Australia?
I lived there for 3 years.
Okay. So, did you ever have a hard time understanding what they were saying?
In the beginning.
In the beginning,
for sure, yeah.
okay. So there is a lot of Australian slang. In fact, there's an app for Australian slang if you ever want to look it up. And you take that and you put it with a bunch of drillers in Asia, and I probably only understood about like 70% of what they were saying. I remember being at, you know, after they had like the equivalent of a wake after this funeral, and I remember these drillers talking to me, and I'm going, this is like a different language. I have no idea what you're talking about. So it absolutely was a culture shock, and it was a culture shock for my husband as well. He went from being, you know, having a career to being a stay-at-home dad in this new country with no friends. And, had to kind of learn that, very quickly. And I was traveling a ton. But it was a great experience, super happy that we did it. My kids learned a ton. In fact, they came back with little Australian accents. Excuse me, do you have any, I didn't bring any water?
I've got water on the way.
Okay,
You're
awesome. What I loved about it was the diverse perspective. So even though you think, it's not really like totally different. It's not like going to China or Japan or even Latin America. There was actually a ton of diversity where we lived in Adelaide. And it was awesome to be able to kind of put my kids in a different environment and know that they were a little bit of the outsiders and kind of to understand what that felt like. And that's something that I feel like my kids have sort of taken into their own set of values today. And so, absolutely love that. Some of the things that I got to work on when I was there, one of the cool projects that I was super proud of is at the time, so this was 2010 to 2013, it was the mining boom. So who is it that's going into oil and gas? Is it you? Okay. So kind of similar type of environment, but this was the mining boom. And in Australia,
The Australian mining? boom?
yes, well, it was a global mining boom.
Global mining boom.
Global mining boom. But Australia is heavily resource intensive, natural resource intensive. So blue collar workers made way more than white collar workers. The average driller, so you had haul truck guys that drove those big haul trucks. They made $120,000 a year, working 2 weeks on, 1 week off, and some mine sites 2 weeks on, 2 weeks off. Which there's a whole interesting cultural element of what that does to economic culture that I could go into. And it was really, really hard to find talent, really, really hard. So especially mechanics, so any talent in particular that had skills. And we needed people who could repair drill rigs when they went down. And that skill set was just really hard to find in Australia for anything that was even reasonably affordable. I remember trying to hire an HR manager in Western Australia in Perth, and this would have been like 2011. And the cheapest I could hire somebody, this would have been somebody with like 3 or 4 years of experience, was like $140,000 a year. So it's just crazy, crazy, crazy. And that person didn't. That person probably jumped from job to job to job. They would have 6 months in a job, jump to the next job, 6 months, and they were making this kind of money. So that kind of gives you a flavor for the economy and what was going on in that time. And so I had to figure out, like, how am I going to keep our drills running? Like, it was kind of a crisis. What was interesting is while Australia was having this boom, you also had this decline in the auto industry. And because Australia is a Commonwealth country, there's reciprocal relationships with like the UK and with other Commonwealth countries, so it's relatively easy to come work from one Commonwealth country to another. So we had this idea, like, hey, let's, there's this auto decline and auto workers with mechanical experience in the UK and in Ireland, and let's see if we can go recruit them to come to Australia. And so we kind of spun that project up, and we sent a bunch of managers, several managers and some recruiters over there, and we recruited a number of people from Ireland and from the UK and brought them over and had to kind of integrate them into Australia and solved our issue that we had with hiring enough mechanics. So that was kind of one of the highlights of my, like, having to really think outside the box and get creative of how, to solve a really, big business problem. So after about 3 years in Australia, I was tapped to, you started seeing the downturn in the mining industry. So in the 8 years that I was at Bort, it did this. There was no like constant flow. You're either in a up or you're in a down. There's no in between. So we were in our second downturn. We just started into the second downturn. What happened was that from a mining standpoint, the price of gold went down below $1,000 an ounce, which, if you go way back, none of you are probably old enough, but it wasn't that long ago where gold was like $300 or $400 an ounce. And then it skyrocketed, and mining companies didn't really have to worry about what their costs were because the price of gold was just outpacing, and so they didn't even have to worry about being efficient or anything like that.
Same with oil.
Same with oil, absolutely. And so what happened is all of these mines could not make money under $1,000 an ounce of gold. And you had similar things going on in like iron ore and copper and those areas. And so we did exploration drilling. That was our primary focus. And so nobody's creating new mines or looking for new minerals when the price of minerals is down. What they do with the mines is they just shut them down and they wait for the price to come back up before they start them back up again. So the CEO of the company, actually, they let go of our CEO, and the chairman took over, and the chairman called me and said, hey, I need you, because you are an impartial third party, to come and figure out how we're going to take $150 million of cost out of the business. And so I did that, and my HR job for a couple of months. By the way, I was pregnant at the time with child number 3. And traveling around the world to all of our sites to kind of figure this out. And then as it got close to having our third, we moved back. They said, okay, time for you to move back and take on this project full time. So they brought in a new CEO, and I started reporting, went away from HR and started reporting directly to our CEO. And with the focus on how do we restructure the business to be able to take out $150 million of cost, and then how do we think about process improvement, those types of things that will help us get there. And so that was a really interesting experience for me, and that's kind of when I get into the next learning, and I don't think I have these in order here, but so one of the things that I get asked a lot by people is like, should I just go get lots of different experiences or should I go deep? And my answer is both, especially for folks in HR. You absolutely should take a job outside of HR, at least once in your career, if not more than once, because it makes you better. It makes you a better leader if you have a more well-rounded experience. But you have to have some sort of depth in something. You have to be an expert somewhere at some point in your career. And so, yeah.
So what would you say is your expertise?
My expertise is really around talent development, is what I would say. It's what I'm passionate about. It's one of the things that I think makes me very well positioned to be at Vivint right now, because it's a huge, huge area that we have to work on. So, but I took this role outside of HR, and I would encourage you guys to take a role outside of kind of your functional expertise a lot earlier in your career than I did. I was a director at the time, and I was reporting into our CEO. And that was a really uncomfortable spot for me to be in, because I was like, I've got this was 2013. So I had been out of school for 9 years. Plus I had several years of HR experience before that. So I had well over 10 to 12 years of HR experience, and had never done anything outside of HR, and pulled me out of HR and said, go figure this out. And I kind of got like, well, how do I do this? I'm not really sure. What do I do every day? What is my job actually? What do I do? I get up and then I do what? And so that was really uncomfortable for me. And I had to, the good thing is I knew I was good at sort of figuring that out. And kind of figured it out. We did accomplish what we set out to accomplish in taking $150 million of cost out of the business. Some of that was through reorganization. Some of that was like figuring out how do we do contract management electronically versus with a bunch of contract administrators, those types of things. And I loved working. We had an amazing CEO. The CEO that we brought in, he was awesome. And then probably about a year into coming home, a little less than a year into coming home from Australia, I got a call from my mentor. And this is where kind of another lesson is around the importance of networking. I have not, there's been one job that I've had in my career that it hasn't come through somebody that I know. In fact, one of the things that I'll ask for your guys' opinion on a little bit later is at Vivint, we struggle with hiring people, particularly at a senior level, unless we know them, because we worry so much about the cultural fit. And so this is kind of one of the things I learned, or I have learned, is the importance of networking. You need to network, have a broad network, but you also have to have a handful of really close connections that you stay connected with regularly. And this individual, his name is Patrick Johnson. He was actually the first CHRO that I worked for at Bort. He left 2 years after I got there. But we stayed well connected, and we had talked. We didn't talk like all the time, but usually once or twice a year we would connect bases. And he called me in probably 8 or 9 months after I had taken this job working for the CEO of Bort, and he said, "Are you getting comfortable yet?" And I said, "What do you mean?" And he's like, I think you might be getting a little too comfortable over there." I'm like, "Well, I just took a new job. What do you mean I'm not like comfortable?" And he's like, "Well, what's your next move?" And I said, "Well, I know I'm in line to be the head of HR for Bort." And he's like, "Yeah, and what's Brad gonna do?" Brad was the CHRO at the time. And I said, "Well, he's gonna stick around here until his kids graduate." And he's like, "Okay, what are you doing?" I'm like, "Well, I'm doing my job." "No, what are you doing, Starr? Like, it's time, you're getting too comfortable with the company. Are you feeling challenged? Are you challenging yourself?" And so I kind of thought about that, and I thought, maybe I am getting a little bit too comfortable. I knew I had been the HR leader for every single member of that executive team at one point in my career there. I was working for the CEO. I knew the business backwards and forwards. I knew where all the skeletons were in the closet. So it was a really comfortable position to be in. I was considered high-performing talent there. And it was like, yeah, I am comfortable. And I thought to myself, do I know how to like start over again if I went to another company? And so I called him back and I said, "Okay, maybe I'm a little comfortable. Like, what do you think?" And he said, "I think you should start interviewing." And believe it or not, up till this point, when recruiters would call me, I would just say, "Not interested, not interested." I never even listened to the recruiter because I loved working for Bort for that long, and it had been they treated me really well. It had been great compilation of experiences. And so I actually took a call from a recruiter. Actually, the recruiter happened to be from Expedia. That was the first time that I had interviewed in the 8 years that I had been at Bort. And then about 2 weeks later, Patrick called me and said, "There is this company called Vivint." And I said, "Yeah, I've seen their signs around. They're these orange signs, right?" And he's like, "Yeah." And I'm like, "Yeah, what do they do?" And he's like, "Yeah, I know the executive recruiter that's doing this search for the head of HR. I think you should talk to them." And I'm like, "Okay, I'll talk to him." And then fast forward a few months, and they offered me the position to be the head of HR, which was awesome and amazing, and has been a completely different experience from my experience at Bort. Bort, it was very much, even though it was a 120-year-old company, it operated very much like a startup company. As I mentioned, they've been sort of torn out of Anglo-America, and they had no systems, and they had to kind of stand on their own. And it was very fast-moving and high growth. But this was a chance to sort of do it for myself, do it for, build my own team, and do it in a technology kind of focused environment. So took the role for Vivint and have been there for 5 years. When I came into Vivint, I would say the HR function was, we talk about HR in terms of HR 1.0, 2.0, 3.0, and this journey that we have. And it was definitely HRO when I got there. It was very reactive. I remember having a conversation with one of my HR business partners, and I said, "Okay, tell me," he was the HR business partner for our innovation center at the time. I said, "Tell me what like the goals are for Matt Eyring." Matt Eyring was our head of innovation. He's now our head of inside sales. And he's like, well, I don't know, like, and I said, well, what do you talk to him about? Well, I've never really talked to him. Okay, I'm sorry, you're the HR person for innovation and you've never talked to the leader? Like, there is something wrong. He didn't last very long. I think I fired him, and then I think our IT folks hired him back or whatever. What I was trying to build was an HR function, and what our goal at Vivint is to be an HR function that is business partner focused, that is highly proactive at achieving business results. And so that has really been my focus while I've been at Vivint, is to figure out how do we transform the HR function into more of a strategic partner, and then help the business grow. And Vivint is this crazy high growth environment. We move very quickly. We pivot on a dime. And so that's one of the other kind of learnings. Let's see where we're at here. Don't be afraid to take the road less traveled here. So this was a big risk, and I have another thing on knowing when to take risks, but how many of you guys are familiar with Vivint? What do you know about Vivint? What? Nothing is going to hurt my feelings. So just, when you think about Vivint, what do you think of?
Bros. The bros.
Bros, okay.
CEO that rocks the t-shirt
He
and
what?
hat.
He has the t-shirt and the hat, yeah.
That's like pretty much all he wears.
Okay. Anything else?
Yeah, just high growth, like, just bread there, door to door is like their bread and butter.
Yep. Yeah. So again, GE, Honeywell, Fort was a lot like a GE Honeywell in terms of their management style. And then you come in, I come into this like, wearing a hat and a t-shirt, and then these sales guys that go knock doors, and people are going, you want to work for this company? Like, is it legitimate? Is everything like kosher here? But it's a really cool company. We are in what I loved about it is we are building an industry. So the smart home industry is something that didn't exist a few years ago. And what Vivint is doing is actually creating what that industry is ultimately going to be and to look like. And so to me, this is the road less traveled, but it's a once in a lifetime opportunity. Because most of you, in fact, almost every single one of you that is going to a company, you're going to a company that's in a well-established industry, which is great. Those are great learning opportunities. For me, the thing that I wanted to kind of go do was like, how do you go create a company and create an industry and then define what that's going to look like? And that's what we do every day at Vivint, and I've absolutely loved it. And it's scary, and it's challenging, and it's all about sense of urgency and being able to pivot really quickly. But it's been awesome, and that's where like my sweet spot is at the moment in my career. Any other questions? Any questions kind of up to this point? A couple of it, yeah.
I was gonna say, so you showed up at Vivint, it was HR 0.0, right? It was brand new. At that point, how big was the company?
So we were about 550 million of revenue, and this 2018 we're about 1.2 billion in revenue. So.
And rough head count, just to kind of give more perspective of how long you can kind of get by with duct tape HR.
Yeah. So we were probably about 6,000 employees when I got there, and they had just implemented right before I got there, like 3 months before I got there. They had just implemented Workday. Before that, it was duct tape HR from a system standpoint, we're about 12,000 employees today. So we've doubled doubled in size since I've been there in the last 5 years, and one of my things that I've had to figure out is scalability. And so that's probably one of the biggest things that I've learned here at Vivint is how do you scale a business and scale it efficiently. So with that growth, I haven't had the luxury of like growing my headcount. Christian will probably know this, but 1 year we got to write our own check. We were going into Best Buy, and they said, tell us how much it's going to cost us. and we all got to write our check and say, this is how much we need to go make Best Buy happen. Fast forward a full year later, sorry, we're taking that check back because Best Buy's not working, so go figure out how do you run your business, how you run the business more efficiently and scale it more effectively. And so for the last 2 years, that has been a big focus of mine, is I don't get to go hire a bunch of new recruiters. I have to figure out how I recruit all of the heads that we need with the same headcount that I have. Same thing with training. How do I go train our thousands of employees that we hire each year, because in our call center we have high turnover. In fact, maybe some of you worked there before, because about half the cities worked for Vivint at one point in our call center. And we have to train all those people, but we don't necessarily get additional resources to do that. We just have to figure out how to do it smart. So some of the things that we're doing, kind of creative to be able to do that. One of the things that we're piloting right now is a chat bot for recruiting. So we hire probably 4,000 to 5,000 people a year between direct to home and the call center and the field, and then all the corporate functions. And the call center is the vast majority of those hires. It turns over at about 150%. And so, I've got like 4 or 5 recruiters that focus on that. And it's for the various components of our call center: monitoring, tech support, loyalty, etc. And a large portion of their job was not very, very value add. They were like calling people, asking them 10 questions, and then saying, okay, come in for an interview, let's schedule an interview. And that is not really value add work. What I want my recruiters to be focused on is like headhunting, and then figuring out what the right process is to assess talent. And so what we're doing right now to sort of use technology to drive out the stuff that's maybe not as value add is a chatbot. And so now if you were to apply online, you could actually apply via text. You could text, I think it's like 2,500 or 25,000. And this chatbot, her name is Olivia, as if she is a person, will then go through, ask you questions, and will actually go all the way through and schedule your interview to then come in and meet with the manager. And what that does then is frees up time for the recruiters to go focus on how do we increase the size of the talent pool that we can draw from, how do we make sure that our managers have the tools to better assess candidates as they come in.
Have you noticed if that chatbot has changed the type of candidate or quality of candidate that you see?
Not yet. So one of the things that's really challenging for us is we try a lot of things at the same time. So to be able to sort of pinpoint like the driving force behind things. So in addition to this chatbot that we have going on, we also have something we call Raise the Bar, which is a thing that we're doing with both training and recruiting and developing our leaders. And all of that has actually driven down our attrition from about 180% turnover to, I think we're running around 130, 140% turnover in the call center right now. So it has, I can't pinpoint to say it has absolutely done that, but it's been an interesting experience because you have to train a chatbot. It's like you train your dragon, you train your chatbot. Because it's artificial intelligence, and so that's been really interesting around how do you actually train AI to do things for you. And there's actually application back into our business. We are, from a product standpoint, entering into sort of AI functionality where our new cameras that are coming out can actually detect, we call them lurkers, if there's somebody that's in an area that they're not supposed to be in your home, outside of your home, then we train the AI to be able to notify you of that. So we're starting to use that kind of technology capability. We're also using chatbots within benefits. I don't know if you were still there when we started.
I wasn't there when you guys started that.
Yeah, so we launched something called Health Joy, which is also a chatbot. And the whole purpose of this chatbot is to eliminate the volume that comes through our MyHR team, which is the team that answers questions about benefits and also to drive reduced costs within benefits. So if you want to do, if if you have an issue, so let's say your son or daughter or spouse or whatever has a sore throat, you can go on to the chatbot, say, I have a sore throat, what should I do? And they'll say, perfect. Let's get you set up with a telemedicine doctor, because that's the cheapest path first. So within 10 minutes, you'll be talking with one of the telemedicine doctors. And if they can solve your problem, awesome. We have just saved a couple $100 of an office visit. If they don't think that they can like fix your problem, then they're gonna say, let's get you scheduled for the clinic, the Vivint clinic in the morning, which is like a really cheap option for us. Or if you can't wait for the morning, then they're gonna go find the cheapest option, the cheapest, best quality option for you. So that's, when I talk about scalability, that's some of the things that I'm talking about that we are working on as an HR team to efficiently and effectively scale our business without having to add a ton of resources. Okay, so that's kind of where I'm at in my career. Yeah.
So several of us have mentioned like this bro culture, right?
Yeah.
Do you see that as a strength of Vivint, or is something that is there? Or, I don't know, how do you see that
Sure.
as the HR person?
So, door-to-door sales is a really tough job. It's tough. I've done it, and I hated it. I would not last on the doors for a summer. It's tough to have to, be walking the streets. And I'm sure many of you guys who served a mission probably you've done it. You know what we're talking about here, and it's hard. And so what I think the strength of our culture is it helps create a sense of community that keeps you engaged and energized to go knock next door. Now the bro culture, the bro aspect of it, I think is a far less than when I got there 5 years ago. We have done some amazing things to drive diversity across the company. In fact, we won an award this year, actually, in Forbes or Fortune, I can't remember, in the top companies for diverse talent. So we had invested heavily in trying to drive, diversity, not just female diversity, but across the board. And the reason that is important to us is a couple of things. One, it's very much rooted in the business objective. So we sell, our product is a mass market product. We sell to every home in the US and Canada. And guess what? Every home in America is not the same. For those of you, I don't know if anybody served a mission, but if you've served in the US or knocked doors somewhere in the US, you probably know, like, a house in Detroit, Michigan is very different than what a house in Salt Lake City, Utah looks like, and it's very different from what a home in New York City looks like. And so for us, diversity is so important because we need people to understand that home is different depending, your version of home is different than my version of home, and the needs for your smart home experience are going to be very different. So, here, a lot of people have garages for their cars, right? Well, there's a lot of parts of America that your house doesn't have a garage. And one of the things that we just came out with this year is something called Car Guard, which actually extends the protection of your home to your car. And in fact, I just got an email right before I came over here of one of our reps who just installed Car Guard in his car 3 days ago. And they woke up this morning and their car was gone, and their car had been stolen, and they looked on their app and they saw that their car was 15 minutes away. And so they actually went over there and retrieved it and had the car towed, and were able to resolve the issue before the police were even able to resolve the issue. And so, but those ideas are not born out of people sitting, people from Utah sitting in Utah, because their version of home is different than somebody's version of home, elsewhere. And so diversity for us is absolutely critical and embedded into the business needs and objectives, because we have to be thinking more broadly about what's important to making people feel safe and secure and what their smart home experience is like. Any other questions about career or?
Would you like to take a drink? I will,
That is a question.
Okay, so we're
Yes,
talking.
I'm- okay.
unless you take a break.
We'll take a look real quick.
You asked for it earlier, so.
Right, the moment of truth.
Can you give us a good Australian accent?
No.
No?
Starr, when Vivian was in New Zealand for a bit, did you have anything to do with, were you there? I know,
I had something to do with selling our New Zealand. The thing that we learned is that, well, and I knew this actually having lived over there, it is hard to make money in Australia and New Zealand. It's
Really?
hard, because it's so expensive over there. Everything is 2 and 3 times the cost. And then culturally, like
Why is
door-to-door, lots of reasons. It's a very,
Is it like taxes? Is it cost of goods,
it's
products?
all of the above. So,
Okay.
look, there's only 24 million people in Australia-ish, and it's expensive they have to import everything, and so it's expensive. And then that makes labor expensive, and then it's really a socialist environment, so there's lots of rules and things on top of that, and going to the movies costs $18 to go to, $18.50, this was like 5-6 years ago.
That's bad, yeah.
Twice
I
So-
follow those indexes, it's, yeah. Pair of jeans is like $100 for just normal, I mean,
Yeah.
it's,
Can of Coke, $4.50.
What?
yeah.
We didn't drink soda, I don't drink soda anymore, so.
Everyone get their scores up at the top,
Um,
see the games.
LSU, that's what I'm talking about.
Murray State is beating Marquette, there's your big upset, 12/5.
MSU, that was obvious. Maryland pulled through, very good.
Wait, Maryland did?
Yeah,
Oh.
my bracket's
Mine
looking
too.
pretty good.
I literally cannot see that.
All right, now back to reality.
All right.
What time do we stop here?
So we'll get to 4:45, so you guys
Okay.
have.
Yeah.
With the scandal, I guess you can call it, with Todd Peterson, is that the CEO's name, isn't it?
What is scandal?
With him putting a car crash.
Yeah.
Did that like have an effect on recruiting? Or
No.
were people fairly open to that?
No, and it really wasn't so it impacted Todd dramatically, obviously. So for those who don't know what happened, Todd is very much into racing, I think they call it Baja racing, is what it's called. But the trucks across like deserts, and it's 500-mile races, and yeah. Anyway, and he was in Mexico, and there was a bunch of bystanders that were actually standing on the road, and he was coming through there at high speeds, and he should have been. It wasn't that he was somewhere he shouldn't be.
Yeah,
It
it's
was
in a
actually,
race.
it was actually these spectators were where they shouldn't be, and he hit a child, and the child died. And that was very traumatic for Todd, and I know it's had a huge impact on how he thinks about the world and life from that perspective, but it didn't really have any impact on recruiting. Yeah.
You mentioned HR 1.0, 2.0, 3.0. Do you have like descriptions of what those are?
Yeah. Probably take me, I'm not sure, it's taking too long to log into our network to grab it on, but basically HR 1.0 is a very reactive environment. So when you think about, the way I structure my team is in 3 pillars. We have our business partners, which are front facing. We have our HR operations team, which is where Christian used to work. That's HRIS and benefits and comp and onboarding, and our My HR team that handles kind of basic employee relations issues. And then we have our centers of excellence, which is like L&D and safety and communications and talent acquisition. And so across each of those pillars, we sort of have identified what do behaviors in 1.0 look like, what do behaviors in 2.0 look like, and what do behaviors in 3.0 look like. Within 1.0, it's very reactive. So we think about HR ops, it's like we report on what happened. When you think about 2.0, it's like, we're starting to anticipate what the business wants to know and develop reports for that. And in 3.0, we're much more predictive. We're producing kind of predictive analytics. On the business partner side, it's like, you're handling employee relations issues in 1.0. In 2.0, you're thinking about the business from a people strategy perspective. In 3.0, you're actually thinking about how do I move the needle on the business, and you just happen to be the expert on the people side of the business. So that's kind of how we think about, how my team thinks about those categories. Any other questions? Yeah.
You talked about like preparing for an international role and being excited when you got it, but how would you say you prepared for that?
So I think it was like
Was
early.
it more technical or like mentally?
No, I think it was, well, first of all, multiple dimensions. One is from a family standpoint. So my husband and I have had conversations early on in our marriage about wanting to go do an international assignment. We actually thought that it would probably be him who would be going to Latin America because he speaks Spanish. And then that didn't turn out to be the case. But we were on the same page that when the opportunity presented itself, it was like, yeah, we had to talk about it, but we also knew that it was a goal that we had, and we were just going to be fulfilling the goal a slightly different way. So that was kind of one thing. I think the second thing is really, and this was really more for as a whole, it was a very much an international business. In fact, our business was only 25% US and Canada. The rest of it was outside of the US. And so really understanding how do you operate from afar. So my team, most of my team was in China, Indonesia, Laos, Thailand, New Zealand, and so I had to be a very good remote manager. But I had to learn that earlier in my career at Bort. And it's funny because at Vivint we're actually not very good at that. I was really good at it. I felt like I was really good at it at Bort, but Vivint as a whole is not very good at like how do you have effective meetings via video conference or teleconference. And we had that nailed at Bort. At Vivint it's like really clunky and it's hard, and if you're not there you really feel like you miss out on a lot of things. And so it's just even stuff like that. How do you be effective from a distance? And then how do you get your voice heard back at corporate when you're in the field? And that is like, doesn't seem like it's a big deal, but it's not trivial. It is how do you make sure you remain relevant, and that you're always that you're in front of your leader, even though you're not in front of your leader physically. Yeah.
So I'm really curious about what you're saying, kind of bringing in more diversity into Vivint, kind of helping change the culture.
Yeah.
Just wondering if you could share some more details
Yeah.
about how you made that happen.
Yeah. So, it started with telling a story, and this is going to sound a little funny, but 4 years ago, there's something called WTC Women in Tech Council that we are pretty active in, and they decided that they were going to host this event to bring companies from across the valley and together, and they were going to do this, have them pitch on what they had done to move the needle in diversity in their company, and they were going to give out awards. And so they called us and they said, hey, do you guys want to participate? And I said, let me get back to you. And I went and talked to our COO, and I talked to my team, and they all said, Starr, you're crazy. Like, we don't feel like we've moved the needle. And I said, well, but you kind of have to have an impetus. Like, you have to have a story that helps to move the needle. So we decided to pitch at this WTC event, and we won, which is just amazing because we had a few things that we had done, but it wasn't like, I wouldn't consider a success by any means. But we talked about like what we believed in, what the business driver was, and why it was so important, and so then we won. And that was actually the catalyst for getting a lot of different initiatives moving. So what did we do? Well, one, we hold our recruiters accountable for making sure that they put together a diverse slate. We never hold them accountable for did we hire a diverse person, because ultimately we are going to hire the best talent regardless, but we need to make sure that we're providing a diverse slate to our leaders. The second thing is making sure that we have diversity in the recruiting process. So if it's just a panel of people who came from BYU and, you know, that are interviewing people, you're not gonna get different perspectives in there. So we always make sure that we have a very diverse slate of interviewers. And when I say diversity, I'm not just talking about racial diversity or gender diversity, I'm talking about like diversity of thought as well. So that's something that we've done. We introduced ERGs over the last 2 years. And those ERGs, while we watch over them, we're the stewards of them, they are not HR initiatives, they are actually rooted in the business. So we have 3 ERGs. We have Vivid Vets, and that's actually led by our supply chain leader. We have Vivid Women, that's actually led by our CIO, Joy Durling. And then we have Vivid Pride, that's led by one of our other Vivid VPs, Kim Maines. And they are passionate about it, and those ERGs are rooted in business objectives. It's all about how do you drive diversity, how do you create a culture that is inclusive, and those have all been, you know, very, very successful. And then mentorship programs, so we introduced a mentoring platform across our ERGs, so that if you're participating in an ERG, then you also get to take advantage of mentorship opportunities. So, yeah.
Can you tell us about how you and your husband balanced work and family and
Yeah.
having kids?
It is an ongoing balance every day. So when we came back from Australia, my husband actually just, so we never, going into talking about like, you know, having those conversations early in your marriage, we never had the conversation like, was one of us gonna stay home? We both thought we would both work. And we waited for a long time to have kids. We were married for like 8 years before we had our first kid. And so we kind of had to feel our way through, like when we went to Australia, how that was gonna work. And then when we came home, I had child number 3. And so he said, you know what, I might as well just stay home with her too. And even though that was never in the plan, but it worked. Like we just kind of made it work. And the key to that has been, one, not having assumptions about like what his role is versus what my role is. And it's still very much a partnership. So I don't expect him to like be responsible for all the cleaning or for the, you know, for cooking or whatever. We kind of figure that out together, or we hire it out. Like now we have a cleaner, and we just kind of had to kind of feel our way through that. We are both heavy into triathlon. So now that my youngest is in kindergarten, he is actually coaching triathlon. He's a coach for triathlon, and then we're both into doing Ironmans. And so there's really 3 or 4 things that we focus on. It's family, it's work, and it's triathlon. And the way we balance is we don't have more than a couple of priorities at a time, because you can't manage more than a couple things at one time. And open communication has just been a key part of that, making sure that we have those conversations and that we don't let too much time go by without saying, hey, how are we doing with where we're at, and then just making adjustments. But it's a balancing act. Like today, he's down in the next couple of days. He's in St. George doing a triathlon camp, and I've got to figure out how to get 3 kids to school, and figure out how they're going to get home from school, and then how we get them fed, and so it's just teamwork, and the teamwork isn't just he and I. It's he and I and people you can rely on, and etc. So, any other questions?
On your first slide you had, what did it say? It said like about your career.
Yeah.
It said like step by step versus leapfrogging.
Yeah.
I've always found like your story like pretty interesting. I feel like you taken on a lot of leadership roles maybe early in your HR career compared to maybe some of your peers. Could you maybe expand on maybe what that is step by step
Sure.
versus leapfrogging, and what you might? I know some people here like you're pretty ambitious and they want to like
Yeah.
kind of like do that. What advice and what do you say about that?
Sure. So when I ask people about like what their career goals and objectives are, I'm always looking for, are they looking for a title or are they looking for experiences? And I always try to root myself as well as people that I coach